get this. Otto, you need to be quiet. Alright. Not right now. That's cool. Pa-ba-da-ba-ba. Alright. Why is it not opening? Oh, because I didn't have it open yet. Aha, victory. Okay. That's oops. Table. Alrighty. And over here.
Okay. All right. So turn this down just a little bit more. So I can make sure I'm audible. All right. Got 9 people in here. A few more before we get started. So we're very much almost done with this chapter. As you can see on the slide here, before we get started, we literally have one more slide. But it's a little bit information heavy, so I didn't want to try and cram this in the last like 5 minutes of class last time. And then we'll jump into Greece, which is a massive PowerPoint. This one was 19 slides. Greece is 37. Now, it's not to say that it's that much more in terms of information, just that I split it up that much more. But Greece is Greece is a lot of stuff. Oh, you can't see Greece because of how because of how that works. I don't have just full screen share. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay. So what we're gonna do from now on, rather than me attempt to call everybody's name out and waste like 10 minutes of class, if you folks can just say that you're here in the chat, that'd be great. Again, if you're using a screen name that's not your actual name, just put your name in the comment. If you're just using like your Google sign in, so it's your regular name, just say that you're here, like most of you are currently doing. So great, thank you again. If you show up late, you won't be hearing me say this, but if you come in, I guess for future reference, for those of you that are here, if you ever come in late, just pop in. It's like, hey, I'm here now. Cool, you're now on the roll. Don't worry about it. So, that's good. Any questions before we jump into the last part of this chapter, and then we'll get the rest of Greece done, because we did the purple people last time, which was correctly answered. Oh, right. I actually had kind of fixed what I was doing wrong this time. Hold on. Move some stuff around. Okay. All right. So, scoot over, go now off kilter. I guess we don't really have anything to go over rather than just jumping right back into it. So let's do that, because Greece usually takes me a while, and I don't want to get too bogged down into that. So, again, if you have any questions, let me know. I might be a little slow to start today. I woke up with a headache, so I'm fighting that. And the sun's wanting to come in the window, so that's fun. So, the last bit of Volume 1. See, I had a long discussion yesterday with a friend of mine about, hey girl, about TV shows, Volume 1 as opposed to Chapter 1. So the Hebrews, they have lasted to today as a culture. The religion, of Judaism, and this tradition of oppression, because as we're going to see throughout this entire course, Jews getting oppressed is unfortunately for them a common thing. Now, they they had monotheism, which, as we said, was a single God. However, do I have it? Is it in the book, or did I pull that out of somewhere else? I was using that elsewhere, I believe. Yeah. So, okay, here we go. Yeah. So again, monotheism means a single God. Now, originally, it began under Abraham, which means father of many. And again, being here in South Carolina, I feel like a lot of us probably have some background on this. At least I know I did coming up. They left the city of Ur, which we've already learned about. And at that time, Judaism was henotheistic, which means that there were other gods, but they were seen as lesser. There are actually older stories in the Old Testament that mention other gods, but as these lesser gods that you aren't really supposed to mess with. And it's also why the first commandment is literally to have no other gods before God, or Yahweh, or however you're supposed to address this top being. So the idea of monotheism came later, which simply just was taking the henotheism to an extreme, which is something everybody knows. So there was this idea of 400 years of captivity to receive Mesopotamia. Moses led the Jews out of Egypt, where they spent some time there working on the pyramids. There's this whole thing with that. Again, when you're writing from the viewpoint of a single people, it's going to be skewed. And I'm not saying that they made it all up. No, not necessarily. And building the pyramids was not. I'm not ever going to defend the people that are like, hey, you're going to build me this giant tomb, because that's bullcrap. But they were all slaves and they were all being crushed under stones all the time. It's like, okay, that happened, but it wasn't always that. And they weren't necessarily slaves. They were voluntarily there. It just wasn't great. So Moses got them out of Egypt. Joshua invaded Canaan. Oops. And the tribes of Israel themselves were very diverse politically, which kept them from properly uniting, which caused issues for them down the road, for sure. Now what? Okay. Getting emails. It's like, now what kind of emails am I getting? Yeah, so again, this idea of, oh, well, all the Jews are the same. It's like, no, not at all. There were, was it 12 tribes of Egypt? See, I don't know as much as. Yeah. So it's, there's a lot to it. Anyway, this shows Abraham's path out of Ur, and then Moses's path out of Egypt, and then eventually both of them settling in Canaan. I like using maps because it makes it easier to visualize what's going on. Also, these books, this particular book is a lot better. It's got one, well, not this one. It's usually got like one thing at the end and then like a picture and then it moves on. The other book has like 5 different texts at the end and it's a bunch of garbage. Okay. And I think, yeah, that's it for that. I told you, we were right there at the end, but it was a little too much for the 5 minutes of class we had left. Okay, so I'm going to close this. And, oh, why is that showing up? That's weird. Huh. Okay, well, let's pull this upwards. Did that work? Oh, we don't want that. Come back. There we go. And grab that specifically. Okay, interesting. All right. Well, here's Greece. Now, I think this is also the point where I mean, I used their, yeah, actually I put it in quotes because I didn't like the title they used, and I begin to use their titles less because I dislike them. Because the mini Greases thing is just, it doesn't work. Oh, okay. Oh wait, I can do that from here. Hold on. let me respond to someone's email. Okay. Cool. Great. All right. So, anyway, I'm being pedantic. So we're gonna move on to Greece now. I want to go ahead and say, I'll say this again once we get to the study guide. But this first test will probably be a little bit. I'm trying to say this without scaring anybody. The first test is usually the most difficult for people, just because that first chapter is kind of all over the place. And it sort of has to be, because it's like, well, the beginning of history. I mean, it's, literally prehistory, and then Mesopotamia, and then Egypt, and then, the Mycenaean Greeks, but also the Hebrews, but also the Hittites, and also this Iron Age and Bronze Age, and all this other stuff. Now, the first test covers the first 3 chapters, so it's that one, this one, which is just Greece, which is good because Greece by itself is a lot of stuff. And then the 3rd chapter, which is essentially just Alexander the Great, which is more Greece. So that's good. It's just that first chapter. I mean, there's no better way of doing it. Is all I can say. But the second test is chapters 4, 5, and 6, which are the start of Rome, and the middle part of Rome, and the fall of Rome. So that's easy. And then the following test is like the early Middle Ages, and the high Middle Ages, and the late Middle Ages. It's like, okay, we can do that. So, there's a theme. It's just this first one's a little bit everywhere. So I just want to kind of warn you guys in advance. It looks like we have a few more people here than we did before. So if you're here and you haven't signed in, which is to say, said that you're here in the chat, do so. That's gonna be our role from now on. So even if you come in late, that's cool. Just say that you're here. That's gonna be our bookkeeping system until I figure something else out that's gonna be better. So Herodotus. This is also one of the things that I tried, and then I'm like, this maybe isn't the best idea. Because the book starts with this really narrative thing that's not chronologically along with everything else. Hey, girl. So Herodotus, he's known as the father of history, but also the father of lies. He's not really either. He wrote to inform and entertain. He told Greeks about lands outside of their city-states because, as we're going to see, the polises, which is the Greek city-state, I'm going to be using polis from here on out, were very insular. They were very isolated and didn't know much beyond their borders, and that was by design. So Herodotus wanted to inform them of what was beyond their narrow worldview. And a lot of times he would embellish what he found. Um, these strange foreign customs, he'd embellish them to make it more interesting. He championed Greek unity and the independence of each polis against the Persian Empire. We'll talk about the Persian Empire probably next week. I don't think we'll quite get to Persia today. Even as these polises were gearing up to fight one another, and I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing that. It's like polis. Greek is not something I'm very good at pronouncing. I can pronounce Latin a little bit. Internet connection. Yes. Ba 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 ba. One second. And he was concerned about the unbridled imperialism of Athens, which I'll also get into. But they ignored him, and it caused, I would argue, more issues than even Persia. What are you doing? Like, black cat is sitting in my lap. There she is. Yeah, she's. I don't know if it was Herodotus specifically, but I know it was Greek explorers that found something physically existed that made them. I'm trying to think of how best to say it. They found something that convinced them that. Anyway, here's Herodotus. There he is. That convinced them that the Cyclops was a real living creature. Is anybody here awake enough to guess what that might have been? The Cyclops. So actually, they found like physical evidence that suggested the Cyclops might actually be a thing. Because I remember seeing a documentary on. I think they were like following the journey of Odysseus and where it would have taken place in the Mediterranean, and they showed, oh yeah, this is probably where they got the idea for the Cyclops. I was like, oh geez, it's super cool. And I can't stare at anybody until they give me an answer because we're doing this online. So let me see if I can. Here we go. Let's open this up. Not a sea creature, actually. Just grab this. And elephant skull. This is the skull of an elephant. And you can see how, especially this one, I mean, it looks almost human, but then it's got this one big hole here that seems like it would be where the eye would be. I mean, and it's huge. But yeah, Cyclops. Because again, right across the Mediterranean Sea is northern Africa. And I mean, they've seen elephants, but when you see an elephant, you don't think this. But that hole there, that's the muscles for the trunk. But you know, they don't know that. Anyway, something I always like to bring up. Okay. Yes, some quotes from some of these folks. In peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons. Very cheerful from Herodotus there. Call no man happy until he's dead. Once again, Herodotus, very cheerful. Now, was he the one that had... No. There's a quote from one of these guys that's hilarious, but also, like, makes you wonder what happened. Okay, so the Greek Dark Ages. I briefly mentioned this when we were talking about Mycenaean Greece. So there was a period of about 300 years where we don't know much at all about what was going on in Greek history. There isn't a lot of, well, history. There's not a lot of evidence. Because as I said, history is technically written record, and if we don't have much written record, there isn't a lot of history. Take another Tylenol real quick. My skull is not liking it. Alright. So as I said, there weren't any kind of contemporary writings. Not a lot of pottery, and the buildings or building ruins had been largely built over by later cities. So there isn't a lot of even archaeological evidence to go back and look at. Now this was after the Mycenaean Age. The cities were destroyed, the people scattered. Now, typically in these dark ages, and this is something that we'll say again when we get to the medieval dark ages, usually when things go poorly for a civilization, when it truly falls, people leave the cities because cities require a certain level of stability to function. You know, you need um, supply chains and whatnot. So they leave the cities and go out into the countryside and find hills and fortify these hills and basically just throw rocks at anybody that come by. And you know that's the basis of starting over is fortifying hills, because you have a high location. It's easy just to put some stakes in the ground and and keep people from attacking you. And you have your family, or maybe extend it to a clan. What? Um, and that's that's the start of another civilization. Eventually, gradually. You want to lay my book, don't you? You're an asshole. This is what I deal with when I'm at home. I have to turn the page. Well, I mean, not the book. The book's, yeah, the book's yours. Okay. Um. Now, gradually, they began resettling the cities. However, the whole surviving via trade and war was no longer sustainable. So each of the cities had to begin fending for themselves, rather than it being, the Mycenaean Greeks as a group. Each city became its own thing, and that's where we get the city states. Each Greek polis became its own thing, which is why you hear it's like, oh yeah, Athens versus Sparta. It's like, yeah, but that was an anomaly where you joined one side or the other. It's like that wasn't usually how it went. Everybody sort of did their own thing. So this was some of the only surviving pottery from this age. Now, the book specifically mentions that the way this was done compared to the way it was done in later times was that they would put the glaze on and then scrape off the part to, yeah, use your words. The yellow was the actual pot, and then the black glaze was laid over top, and then they, scraped off to make the piece. Later on, it was reversed, where they used the glaze to actually make the pitcher, and then the bare pot would be the rest of it. I would tell you exactly what that was called, but there's currently a cat butt in my way, and I can't do anything about that. So, as we saw with the Iron Age, it spread throughout most of these areas by about 1000 BC. Now, of course, if iron is being used for tools and weapons, well, it's now important. So, finding and mining iron is going to be very important for the economy of each of these city-states. I'm assuming my mic is picking me up okay. Since I'm having to sit way back here now, how dare I disturb my tiny cat? So again, um, very localized, very specific to each polis, and they would protect their deposit of iron rather than trading it between the polis uh, for what they would need. Yeah, my brain's not working today. Rather than trading it to other policies for something that they might need. That's what I was trying to say. So, like, if say one of the city states say needed food, but they had a lot of iron, they could trade it to a polis that grew a lot of food, but say didn't have a lot of iron. Nah, that wasn't how they rolled. So as we said, by the end of Mycenaean age, they were very isolationist, which was not great for their strength. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It was a weird combination of good and bad for Greece because they're constantly fighting against one another, which means they were constantly all having to stay strong, but then they also couldn't really form a unified front. It's weird. But also early on, now this is way before the idea of Athens and Sparta and uh, Corinth and all of that. Um, very early on, farms was only enough for individual families. Uh, there weren't governments to keep things in order. You had blood feuds between the families. Now this is much later on. As you can see, the weaponry is a lot more advanced than what you'd have in these early stages. Yeah, the early, well, I say early Greece. Early Greece after the Dark Ages is very rudimentary and chaotic. So, as I said, um, the families would get together in defensive villages, usually on top of hills, and they would wall them off from the outside because, once again, if everything's gone to hell, you get on top of a hill and you put up a wall and you throw rocks at anybody that comes by. If you know anything about Tri-County Tech in Piedmont, not Piedmont, I keep getting those mixed up. Pendleton, um, out towards Clemson, it is way up on a hill. And I'd always make the joke with my students, like, yeah, all we need is some fortifications, and we'd have ourselves a really good little hilltop fort here, because that thing was seriously on a hill. It was crazy. So here's some Greek terms for you, probably important. Hint, hint. So it had a high spot, the Acropolis itself, um, the marketplace, which was the Agora. What do you want? You're making this very difficult. Now, as usual, the people who owned the land were the ones who were in charge, and only male landholders could be citizens. Don't bite me. Now, one thing that was beneficial was due to how poor everything was, when the Assyrians and Phoenicians were beating the bejesus out of each other, uh, Greece was so weak and isolated from everything that they were completely left alone. So, you know, that was good. And while Phoenicia might have been in bad shape, Carthage, which we'll talk about in greater detail in chapter 4, anyway, uh, really controlled the Mediterranean in terms of trade, and it helped to pull Greece from its economic depression because it was trading with everybody. And if Greece had something to trade, it was happy to trade. So here is a very basic cartoon of your Greek polis. You got your Acropolis there at the top, usually where the temple would also be. There's my mouse. I can't quite move. The Agora is down here at the bottom. It's the marketplace. That's usually the largest part of the polis. Now you've also got the area around here. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's also a part of the city state as a whole in terms of the political structure. So while it's not physically part of the city because it's not within the walls, it's still a part of like the citizenship of say if this was Athens, they would still be Athenian. What? Oh Jesus, settle down. And then of course the port, which is very important. Now, this isn't Athens because Athens, the walls surrounded the port. Ports, plural. So, Homer. Now, the thing about stuff this long ago, we're not 100% sure if Homer even existed, which, I mean, the same can be said for Shakespeare. Excuse me. But we'll just go ahead and say that Homer is credited with the Iliad and the Odyssey, or at least poets that claim to be Homer spread the tales of the Iliad and Odyssey. We've only narrowed it down to a period of about 250 years where he lived, so, you know, good enough. Supposedly he was blind. He orated as poems to be written down. Now, again, him being blind didn't necessarily. He didn't have to be blind for him to only want to orate his poems and not want to write them down. I mean, when we get to, you know, some of the great some of the great philosophers and whatnot a little bit later in this chapter, and the next. Their teaching method was just to walk around the city and talk at people. Like there was no real written method of what they did. So, you know, that's just how people did things. Now, most of his tales were from great heroes of the Mycenaean Age, particularly the Trojan War. That was the Iliad, was the Trojan War. What? Yeah. Um, the Odyssey is more fantastical. You know, it's the story of Odysseus traveling around the Mediterranean and getting into all sorts of shenanigans. But he was still a hero of the Trojan War. So there's that. Getting hair all over my face because somebody's shedding. Um, and the main takeaway from this is that besides that Homer's like our only uh, real source about the Trojan War, besides the archaeological evidence, uh, but there was still cultural activity in the Greek Dark Ages, even though most of it was looking back to the good old days of the Mycenaean Age. So even though this was, you know, an era of not much happening in terms of writing or record keeping or really anything, um, this was when we got Homer, and that's a pretty big deal. So, you know, not nothing. And, you know, I had to. For some reason, one of the best pictures I could get of Homer was of him being accosted by a dog on the road. I don't know what that's about. There's an image of the Trojan horse. Train. Ah, that's something else. If we ever make it back to the continuum, there is a train track. I don't know how many of you actually live in Lake City, but there's a train track like I swear it feels like it's 15 feet from the. Oh my goodness! Sorry, my cat is yelling at me. Um, there's a train track that feels like it's 15 feet from the building. I mean, I'm used to living close to a train track, but it's a little bit crazy. Anyway, Trojan horse again. Most of us know this story. So the Greek alphabet. It was adapted from the Phoenician writing, but as I said, Phoenician writing was only consonants. So Greeks had to do something with that, and the Greek alphabet sort of invented vowels so that you could read literature the way it was meant to sound. And I know it's like, but what did they do before that? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure like a linguist would be able to tell you. It's like, oh, well, it's easy. They just did this. It's like, oh, okay. I don't know. I don't know. I've got no idea what they did before this. Um, but this is the best I got. Now it didn't spread that quickly, or even catch on that quickly, because again, it's not like where it's not this idea of, hey, we've got a thing, now everyone's using it. That's not the way it works. Uh, it's not like, you know, oh, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb in whatever year it was. Say I'm a historian. I don't know what year it was. 1860, whatever. Not everybody used not everybody had electricity until well, not everybody has electricity, but there was a large portion of America that didn't have electricity until after World War One. There was a period during the Great Depression. One of FDR's things that he did to try and get people back to work was like, we're going to electrify the Tennessee River Valley. Because there was just thousands of farmers who just didn't have electricity. So my point is, getting way off track, is just that just because, hey, here's a thing that we have, doesn't mean that everybody immediately has it. But that said, this new alphabet, this use of Phoenician writing with now vowels, did allow for the preservation of a lot of Greek writing to the modern day, including Homer's poems. I mean, well, like I said, I literally watched like a feature-length documentary on the Odyssey on, it was either the History Channel or National Geographic, but it was like, we're gonna follow the tracks of Odysseus and see these places and maybe figure out what these things could have been. And that was so cool because I mean, it just showed a lot of really neat places in the Mediterranean because it's gorgeous. Um, but yeah, so it's neat stuff. And in particular, the Iliad. As much as I talk about the Odyssey, because I mean it's this tale of fantastical stuff. But for the Greeks in particular, the Iliad was very popular because for them, all of them could identify with it because it was their heroic past. All of them were like, "Oh yeah, that's us. That's our Mycenaean past." Because even whether you're Athenian or uh, Corinthian or whatever, you were Mycenaean Greek. Not technically Spartan. We'll talk about that later. Spartans are weird that way. So here's the some of the alphabets, or some of the letters rather. The early like Canaanite letters, and then the early Phoenician letters, and then what they eventually would become in Greek. And granted, the Greek letters are still a bit much for us today, but a lot more people can read Greek than this other stuff. And in fact, it's Greek that allowed us to read the Rosetta Stone, which I'll get into next chapter. So, late in the Greek Dark Ages, there was this revitalization of culture, government, religion, etc. So Greece is coming back into itself again, still isolated, still doing its own thing, um, but at least becoming less these, villages throwing rocks at each other. Still, a lot of tension. The people who had power wanted more power. Those without power, which were a lot more, were not happy about it. So to keep the people that didn't have power from just rising up and murdering everybody, there were the Olympic Games. Do we have? I don't know, Kat. I would look, but you're in my way. That's what I get for having my book open in my lap. The Olympic Games increased importance of religious authority, tyrants. I think I actually. Yeah, I'll talk about them more in a minute. So here is Archaic Age Greece in a nutshell. So the purple there is where we have the city-states. And then the orange is things that are still rather tribal and disorganized. Notice down here in Sparta is neither. Sparta did not organize for quite a while. Sparta was a latecomer to Greece and not technically part of the old order, which I think is why they were given so much crap by the other city-states. So, Olympic Games. It's actually the first fixed date in Greek history, 776 BC. This Pan-Hellenic, which means all Greek festival at Olympia, down in Peloponnesus, which is where Sparta would eventually show up. This was to honor the Greek gods, in particular Zeus, because Zeus was the big one. Was to be held every 4 years. These athletes would come from all over Greece, representing the polis, and this was the way for them to compete against one another without, going to war and murdering each other, as one does. Here's some more Greek terms. It might be important. Hint, hint. This did combine the idea of your individual excellence, which is arete, and the belief that life was a constant struggle or competition, which was agon, which is something that was part of. What are you doing? Which was part of like the everyday Greek life back then, just distilled into a single event, which was pretty cool. Now this is the Olympic Games in, I think this was post World War I, when they were actually able to have the Olympic Games again. I'll put the last PowerPoint up on Blackboard, as well as the my brain is just not working today. Find the right words. The syllabus. Who dares? More emails. Lunchtime. As with the Olympic Games, you had the Oracle of Delphi, which was dedicated to the god Apollo. This was another way to have the Greeks united, because while they, sort of would do their own thing and maybe would revere certain gods more than others, like, Athens, of course, was dedicated to Athena specifically. They all still revered all of the gods. Excuse me. So they'd have a common ground. Now, the thing with the oracle, though, is it was used to justify actions rather than trying to think of how best to say it. It was used to justify something that had already been done rather than ask for advice as to what should be done. So rather than, hey, we're gonna go to war. What do the gods think? It's, hey, so we've been at war for 2 years. Are the gods cool with that? Because that's the thing that's happened. Maybe not that extreme, but again, it's something that's already happened. So here again is some of the older pottery style of the oracle. And some paintings that are very much not of the time. She was probably high. Lots of, let's say, incense. Okay, this should be a good place to finish up Greek immigration. So, during this archaic age, the economy was stable enough that the Greeks were setting up settlements on these coastal lands around the Mediterranean. Actually, yeah, this is a good place because this leads into what we'll get into next time. Now, these weren't colonies. This wasn't, and it's hard not to just say colonies, but this wasn't like, as we'll see with European colonies being set up across the Atlantic or elsewhere. The Greek called these homes away from home. They were independent. Now, the reasons they were there were many. But yeah, they were politically independent from the cities that they came from. Like, if a group left Athens and built a city, they might build a city similar to Athens. They might build a city that might have similar traditions to Athens. And they might trade with Athens, but they were not under the control of Athens. They were a new independent city. So that's something interesting, and something that should be understood because of what's going to happen. So technically, these new cities, or rather, technically, the mainland Greece is not responsible for the safety of these new cities because they're independent and they're doing their own thing. So here again, the blue is the Greek cities, and it's not just mostly here, and then the west coast of Asia Minor, but all the way over here in the Black Sea, over here in southern Italy, friggin' southern Spain. Now, the red is also important for much later. But there's Phoenicia again. There's Carthage. Look at that. But yeah. Now, that's a little bit far inland for Greece. That's not quite correct. But they did. This is the main area we're talking about. This is a little bit extra, but this is we'll get into this. Hesiod. Let's get through Hesiod real quick, just because there's a lot to talk about with him. Hesiod. Theogony, dealing with the Greek gods, works and days. Actually, I don't talk much about Hesiod, so let's just get through him. Complained about corruption, hard workers should rule the world. Holds him more aggressive. Bad neighbors, great. Calamity is a good one, is a great advantage. Is he the one with the funny? Gossip is mischievous. Yes, this is, yeah, Hesiod's the one with the, it's like, Hesiod, who hurt you? Okay. That'll do it. Rather than, tyrants, yada yada yada, governments. Yeah, we'll do this next time. Yeah, that'll do it for us. We'll continue on Tuesday. Get into the rest of this political stuff, and then Persia, which is going to be most of the rest of the chapter, and then probably the Peloponnesian War for next Thursday, because the Peloponnesian War is basically the last part of the chapter. All right. So that'll do it. If there's not any questions, that'll be it. The next Tuesday, the weather might be a little bit rough because the hurricane will be passing north of us, but we should be fine. Hope nobody's got family down in Louisiana because it's currently rough. So it's gonna be rough. It's bad right now. So good luck to all of them. So yeah, unless there's any questions, I will see y'all next week. Have a good weekend. And yeah, this video will be up as soon as YouTube posts it, because I don't have any control over how quickly it posts it. All right. Well, with that said, y'all take care. See you guys next week. All right. Later.